What if I travel to the future, killed my future self, and then returned to the past? What if I traveled to the past and got killed by my past self? What if I traveled to the future, learned about my death, and tried to prevent it? These are all very interesting discussions about time travel. Unfortunately, though, most answers are problematic because they're either too vague, too specific, or trying very hard to be scientific and realistic. And so, to me, it really felt that it's lacking the full answer. Now, this is partly because time travel is weird, despite it being the best sci-fi concept out there. And yet, I've come to realize something very suspicious. No one on YouTube has ever made a series about answering time travel questions. But wait, I love time travel, so what if I just did it myself? It's almost as if this moment was just waiting for me. Okay, but who am I even to talk about this? Well, you see, I love time travel maybe a little too much. So much so that where I made a game where each loop can affect each other in real time. Not to mention, I've also consumed a shit ton of time travel media, so I hope that's enough. So, welcome to my little series, Ask a Time Traveler, where I give deep answers to your time travel questions. Okay, now, I'm not actually a time traveler, but I gotta beat the YouTube algorithm somehow, so blame the system? Anyway, let's finally get to the first question. Oh, and you can find a link to it in the description below. What if I time travel to the future, killed my future self, and then returned back to normal time? So normal time here should mean where and when you left from your original timeline. Now, before I get to answering, I want to first look at the posted answers. Now, the first answer is actually pretty well thought out. Just because you killed your future self doesn't mean you'll meet the same fate. You could die earlier than this in a different way, or you could have killed a version of you from an alternate timeline, so naturally that doesn't affect you. But then I kind of lost him in the middle, as he somehow shifted the narrative where the self-future would try to prevent this event, but then he just gives up if it creates a closed loop. Now, I think this answer is actually pretty good, but it's not the full answer that I would have wanted to hear. The second answer is too specific and narrowed down in my opinion. It says that you'll be immune to death until that moment in time. Now, to be fair, while it's technically correct to be a valid answer, it assumes a system to exist for a fact, when there is nothing to dictate that. It's just that it's implicated in a way where this is the only correct answer, which is ultimately why I didn't like it. But also, the remainder of it is blocked, so we may never know, I guess. The third answer is just a bunch of definitions without even an answer, so that felt very short. Okay, so let's actually first dial down this question to giving your future self a handshake, then going back to the past. And let's make it 3 hours into the future instead of a very long time. Now, some of the answers were already mentioned, but let's pretend they were not. With that said, here's what could happen. You unknowingly went to an alternate timeline and gave yourself a handshake. Or you still unknowingly went to an alternate timeline but found nobody, or was denied the handshake, or you were already dead in this timeline. Or, because you didn't plan to create a paradox, you were allowed to go to the same timeline, give your future self the handshake, go back in time, and then 3 hours later you would meet your past self and receive the handshake. Though, personally speaking, I don't always like this answer, because most of the time from what I have seen, it's used in a lazy or ugly way. Or, you never found your future self, but only after you realize that, for an unknown reason, your time machine doesn't turn on, or simply doesn't allow you to return to the past, but it still allows you to go forward. Or it got stolen. Or you just happened to die in the future before returning to the past. And hence, you were never able to go back to give yourself the handshake. Or, as soon as you return to the past, you are forced to forget what happened on your trip, so you can't actually prevent it. Or, when you return to the past, you really are invincible until you give yourself the handshake. So, in other words, you don't have to kill your future self in order to be invincible until you receive the handshake. Or, when you return to the past, even if you were to try to be in a completely different place from where you give yourself the handshake, your past self will mysteriously appear with the time machine near you to give you the handshake. Or, this is all just a facade. and you're actually inside of a simulation. So even creating a paradox by stopping yourself is just meaningless, because it's all fake. Or maybe you remember everything as soon as you return, but you unknowingly made a promise with the universe itself. So, if the same events don't happen, then it would create a paradox, and the universe itself will break. All life, all existence is destroyed in an instant. Just like the game Outer Wilds. If you were to travel back in time and kill yourself, would you still be alive? Now, although this is what the title says, the context is actually a little different. Now, similarly to the first question, let's simplify this one. Okay, so Bob went back one day to the past and had a quarrel with his past self, let's call him Bobby, and he was killed by Bobby. The question is, will Bobby still be alive one day later? Okay, so let's look at the answers. The first answer is, well, it feels very dismissive, but also very simplistic. Yes, it is the grandfather paradox, but that's it? The second answer is actually trying to be more open. It's the alternate branching timeline model. Yet, the wording is quite weird on this one. So, if it's a single timeline, that means there are no other timelines, period. But if there are alternate timelines, that doesn't actually restrict you from going to the past of your own timeline. And so, this is why the wording here was very weird. The third answer is starting to get deeper. While it also arrived at the alternate timeline model, it did so in an unconventional way. Yet still, similarly to all previous answers, they are too focused or narrowed down into a specific idea or model. Now, before I answer this, let me first start with the title of the question. What happens if you killed your past self? Which means Bob killed Bobby. Here's what could happen. Well, the universe could just break, but that's too simple. Or you're simply not allowed to do that, so you get paralyzed or something goes wrong that prevents you. Or you find yourself in circumstances that don't allow you to reach it or indirectly interact with it. Or you were never even allowed to go back to the past because of your intentions to cause this paradox. So perhaps your time machine just malfunctions. Or, as mentioned, you've branched the timeline when you return to the past, or unknowingly entered a different timeline, so it doesn't matter if you're dead or not. It's just that your timeline simply doesn't have you anymore. It could also be something very strange, where the event of killing your past self is actually two paired timelines that were predestined to have this specific interaction. This can also mean there is an infinite pair of these timelines where exactly these events happen. Or, as mentioned earlier, it could be a facade, just a simulation, and the future was never dependent on the past. Or perhaps, because you would have caused this paradox in the future, you actually lived your life with circumstances that never allowed you to use the time machine, let alone discover it. Or instead, before you were even born, you died in your birth. Or you simply didn't win the race of life. Now, as for the second scenario, Bobby killing Bob is almost exactly like the first question, where the past self kills the future self. But the framing here is different. Now, because in this example, Bobby kept living for the next day, that should mean Bob has unknowingly traveled to an alternate universe. But let's assume Bob traveled to the same timeline. What now? Here is what could happen. Well, yeah, again, the universe could blow up, simple enough. Or things could get very meta right now. You see, Bobby wouldn't just want to kill Bob out of nowhere, unless Bob made an old promise to intentionally kill his future self if he sees it. Or unless Bob has given Bobby reason enough to kill him. In both cases, the universe could either prevent this encounter from ever happening, exactly like the examples we have discussed so far, or again, it was just a simulation. Or what if Bobby captures Bob and sends him back to the future? Though this is where Bobby would then have to travel back in time again to meet his past self and follow the same path. But this interestingly opens another can of worms. You see, if Bob went back in the same timeline and this path was taken, wouldn't Bob 1, 2, and 3 be in the same place all at once? Because by the time Bobby goes back in time, Bob would already be there. So would both time machines in this case just appear on top of each other? If so, that would then create a paradox. If not, then it would also create a weird situation where Bob 1 is being captured by Bob 3 while Bob 2 is just hiding somewhere. But if this continues onward, it seems we've entered a recursive loop, which only seems to have one end. A paradox where all of this was either never allowed to happen, or Bob 1 could have just combusted inside of the time machine. But no, not really, because what if the last Bob just kills himself or gets killed? In this case, all of the other Bobs simply never existed because the last Bob is the most recent past Bob. But this could also happen if one of the Bobs wasn't sent back to the future or didn't go back to the past. And what's quite interesting here is all of this could have just been inside of a time loop bubble that started as soon as Bob 1 went to the past. And this bubble is just waiting to be broken. And as soon as it did, Bob 1 finds himself inside of the time machine just about to go back to the past for the very first time. Now, I'm pretty sure that was a lot to take in, but that's just how time travel is. I just love how many scenarios can happen with the right context and rules. Speaking of which, there's actually one last elusive yet important point that I kinda mentioned earlier. If you hadn't noticed, I mentioned several times that you might unknowingly go to an alternate timeline, and so no paradox would happen. Yet, the interesting thing here is, what if you knew? If you knew from the get-go that this is how it is gonna end up, would you still do it? Now, this isn't meant to be a philosophical question, because it's just purely based on context. In most cases, there would be no convincing reason to take such a risk. But let's say that perhaps you must do this to preserve your own timeline, just like Loki. Or you did this to replace your other self from another timeline to take over its life. Like Dark Matter or that one episode from Rick and Morty. But that's it for now. And yeah, I know. 2 questions? Well, this episode is supposed to be short because I'm trying out this new series idea. However, as for the next episode, I want to hear your time travel questions to answer them. Okay, but there is one very important last thing I have to say. I know there's a ton of possibilities that I have not mentioned in my answers. And I know this makes me sound like a hypocrite considering that I was complaining about discussions not having full answers. But you see, the point of this series is to expand the casual viewer's horizon on what fictional time travel even is, which I'm hoping will help you better appreciate and critique the depths of time travel media. So even if we discover that time travel isn't possible or it works in a certain way, that shouldn't stop us from imagining it in different ways. But also to make it easy for literally anyone to ask their time travel questions, and trust that they will get the best answer there is. Well, I'll try my best. So, in a sense, I'm like your time travel buddy, who'll not only believe that you are looping, but also guide you on how to navigate and break your loop. Now, as for the full answer, let's just say that I have another series where I'll teach you how to fish. Well, that's it for now, and I have seen you later. So, the moral of this video is, you don't need a time machine to kill yourself.